Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Shikiar. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Marketing Officer at FIDO Alliance. I'm very happy to welcome you all to our first ever APAC Virtual Summit. This will provide you with 3 days of insights and perspectives from throughout the APAC region. Asia Pacific's long been a hub of innovation for FIDO Alliance. Some are longest members, some are earliest deployments, and some are most exciting futures all rest throughout Asia Pacific. So I'm very excited to initiate the 3 days of conversations we'll be having over 3 blocks of time each day. And I hope that you're able to tune in for all the global content as well as the region-specific content that you may be interested in based on your own location and professional interests. So I'm going to kick things off today by giving you an update on where FIDO stands in the rapidly evolving global identity and authentication landscape and what we have in store for you ahead. So first of all, I think it's helpful to look back. I personally have been in the identity space since 2001. I know many of you who follow FIDO, a lot of our community has also been in the identity space for a long time. In the past 20 years or so, there have been many identity concepts and initiatives developed and socialized with great intent, such as those you see here. Some of these terms and initiatives are, in the identity standards graveyard. Others have seen success, and others yet have morphed into new concepts that are still being worked on, iterated on, or even commercialized. But really, looking back on things, I'd say that the first 2 decades of the 2000s were really a period of iteration in identity, letting these seedlings, these concepts mature. But it's just been in the past few years where the pace of innovation in identity and pace of implementation has really accelerated. This has been driven by some current trends, such as those we highlight here. So digital wallets, government identity services, and a general push towards passwordless as more and more businesses and organizations have come to see the risks associated with passwords. These key initiatives that have often merged several identity concepts together, leveraging all the work that's been brought to market over the past 20 years to drive real change in the marketplace worldwide. But when you look at these things, what's needed? A core, and I guess kind of obvious element is strong user authentication, right? So if you want to look at digital wallets or government services or going passwordless, strong user authentication is a requirement. And of course, this is FIDO's focus and has been our focus since we launched nearly 10 years ago. And COVID, the pandemic that we're still in, has really made a bad situation worse, right? We've all seen scary statistics about how bad passwords are and the risks they present. But the pandemic, simply created a broader attack surface in which hackers could work within. All of a sudden, there were remote workers who have never worked remotely. There's a percentage of, our consumer base that have never taken part in digital services, digital banking. So this created a massive opportunity for hackers. And it's little wonder then that we see things such as 18 million COVID-themed malware and phishing emails blocked by Google each day. We see nearly a threefold increase or over a threefold increase in attacks on the financial services sector. More and more data. And as we look back on things, we see more and more evidence that hackers leveraged COVID to commit a massive spike in fraud, and there's ongoing attempts to leverage this to benefit hackers, much to the detriment for the rest of society. But a common theme across all of these statistics, and the common thread that hackers leverage is that they really take advantage of our good nature as human beings, right? And a lot of these are phishing attempts, remote attacks. They're duping people into giving away their passwords or logging in to systems that really aren't the systems they intend to log into. And so, I think this shows that in addition to strong user authentication, we need to look at technology that minimizes the human element. All right. So we need to take the burden off of users. If you're a CISO or an IT manager, I think it's important to absolutely train your employees to spot phishing attacks, but it's better off to let them focus on their day jobs and not try to have them moonlight as part of their InfoSec efforts. So these are 2 things that we need to put in place to make sure the next wave of identity innovation can happen. Ultimately, a fundamental shift is needed in the market. We need to move away from knowledge-based credentialing to possession-based credentialing. So what's that mean? Knowledge-based, of course, are things that are in your head, things things that are remembered. This is the way we've always logged into services. There's a secret that sits on a server. If you answer that secret correctly, you're logged in. When we want to move from that to things you actually hold. So from what you know to what you have or what you are. So moving from things that are stored in a server to authenticating people on device, right? With data that never sits on a server. Moving from SMS OTP as a second factor to looking at things like biometrics or other factors that are, again, inherent to the possession of a device or the user itself. Moving from KBA for account creation to more modern forms about document authentication and identity verification. And ultimately moving away from passwords to things like pass keys. And the fundamental difference here is that knowledge-based credentialing is susceptible to common threats, whereas possession-based credentialing is phishing resistant and prevents these large-scale attacks. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is move away from using human-readable shared secrets that are sent over the wire and sit on a server. That's not just passwords. Keep in mind that also includes OTPs. Whether it's SMS or even authentication apps, those are still human-readable secrets that are being transmitted over the wire. It could be either phished through technology or through social engineering. We need to stop all of that by moving to possession-based authentication. And of course, that aligns well with FIDO's goal from day one, which was to transform the market away from dependence on centrally stored shared secrets to a model that uses public key cryptography and allows consumers to authenticate through devices that they literally have in their fingertips every day. It's simpler, stronger authentication using user-friendly, asymmetric public key cryptography. And as you see in this simple matrix here, is we're trying to find the sweet spot, and we are finding the sweet spot in usability and security. So more usable and secure than passwords and other outdated means of legacy multi-factor authentication. Now, FIDO's rapidly realized this goal. So we were formed as an organization close to 10 years ago. But the first sets of specifications of FIDO UAF and U2F specs came out in 2015, saw rapid adoption, and we've accelerated adoption since then, as I'll talk about in a couple of moments. A little bit about FIDO Alliance itself. Who's behind FIDO? This is our board of directors. So we have over 250 members worldwide, over 40 members on our board of directors. This is more than just a set of logos. To me, it says a couple things. First of all, it says that we have the right set of companies sitting around the table, working on this audacious goal to move the world beyond passwords. Secondly, when you look at these companies and the hundreds of companies, at the sponsor and associate level who have all contributed to FIDO, it's important to realize that the specifications FIDO's released aren't just documents, right? They reflect tens of thousands of hours of contributions from some of the brightest minds on the planet in identity and security and biometrics. So there's very meaningful IP that has been built collaboratively, by all these companies over the past several years that are now freely available for people to implement and deploy to protect users worldwide. Looking at this a little bit more locally, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Asia Pacific's always been a critical part of FIDO Alliance. It's just part of FIDO's DNA, frankly. Roughly a third of our companies are headquartered in the broader, APAC region. You can see several of those companies listed here, and most importantly, you'll be hearing from many of these companies and many of these regions over the next 3 days. And all of these members, in Asia and worldwide, have built something very real and disruptive. Authentication standards that are now being built into devices at massive, massive scale. Just look at the numbers, right? Over 4 billion devices support built-in cryptographic strong authentication. This distribution, this scale is what's needed for the market to truly move past passwords and shared secrets, right? The technology just needs to be there in users' hands for service providers to feel confident deploying this at scale. And, it follows, of course, that we're seeing deployment at scale. This is a small subset of companies that have deployed FIDO, but it's meant to give you a feel for the breadth and depth of industries, geographies, and use cases where FIDO is being deployed, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's enterprise, government, social media, banking, payments, finance, healthcare. Really, we're seeing every sector, every geo start to deploy FIDO at scale, which is very exciting. And drilling down again into Asia Pacific, I'm happy to say this is somewhat of an eye chart. There's so many logos here, and this is just a subset, frankly, especially in Japan, where we've seen many more companies deploy. But we've seen some of the earliest adoption happen in Asia, particularly with UAF. So for native apps, for banking and other sectors. But we're seeing more and more embrace now of the full FIDO 2 for FIDO for platforms being deployed in a variety of settings. So not just consumer mobile apps, but also mobile web, enterprise web, and other use cases where FIDO is very well suited. And I think it's interesting to look at what are the key drivers for FIDO adoption in Asia Pacific. So Steve Wilson will be talking to you this week also, kind of giving you some perspectives of identity and authentication in the region and globally. But at a very high level, I think there's key drivers for FIDO adoption in APAC that also, frankly, hit worldwide as well. First of all, there's government recognition. We think this is very important for any new technology to take root in any country, is to have some regulatory embrace and recognition. And we've seen this in Asia, right? So we see it in Korea and Taiwan and Australia and elsewhere, where FIDO is either being utilized for government services or recommended for use in regulated industry. Secondly, there's strong market demand. We have market studies that demonstrate that FIDO's approach to MFA is not only superior to legacy approaches, but it's preferred by more and more enterprises and service providers who are seeking to deploy. Additionally, we see great market opportunity, right? So the global spending, including the ASEAN countries, is meant to almost double in the next 5 years. So there's great opportunity for the FIDO certified ecosystem to tap into this market demand. And then last but not least, a lot of this is threat driven, right? We talked before about the increase in attacks thanks to COVID, but there's ongoing threats, and these have been documented by groups like World Economic Forum, Interpol, and we're seeing enterprises and companies throughout Asia Pacific and globally deploy FIDO to help combat these threats. And scaling back globally again, I think it's very notably to talk about the fact that we have unified commitment from all the core platforms, not just to contribute to FIDO's efforts, but to use the technology as well. So 3 examples here. So Google has announced they're giving security keys to high-risk users that are being targeted by government hackers, right? So security keys are part of Google's advanced protection program, the preferred, actually the only means of 2FA in Google Advanced Protection. And Google's backing that up by actually giving keys away to make sure that their users don't get hacked in targeted means. Also, very exciting, Apple back in June, one of the highlights, frankly, of 2021 is Apple announcing that they're introducing something called passkeys. What passkeys are, they're synced on the iCloud keychain. It's basically, instead of syncing complex passwords across iCloud, they're now going to be syncing FIDO key pairs, right? So, and it's consumerizing FIDO authentication to the point where, as an iPhone user or an iPad user, you can choose to issue what looks to the user just like a biometric login, but on the back end, it's actually a web authent credential or public key, FIDO public key on the server, and a private key on the device and across iCloud. So we're looking forward to seeing that expand in 2022. And then last but not least, Microsoft, who's another key stakeholder on the platform side in FIDO Alliance, has allowed Microsoft account users to go password free earlier this year. So hundreds of millions of people with Microsoft accounts now have the option of eliminating their passwords altogether in favor of password free mechanisms, including things like Windows Hello, FIDO security keys, and biometrics. So all in all, I think we have very positive momentum as we wrap up 2021 heading into 2022. So, what's FIDO Alliance as a body doing to help this? A couple of things. First, we're very focused on education and enablement, right? We understand technology alone won't solve this problem, won't help the market move forward. So we're doing a couple of things to enable and facilitate adoption. First of all, we've released UX guidelines. So these are English written guidelines, but they could certainly be leveraged in other languages as well, which help service providers get guidance on how to have an optimal way to deploy FIDO for desktop authenticators. So these guidelines were released earlier this year. We've had hundreds of downloads, and many enterprises and service providers give us feedback that they're using these successfully to onboard, enroll, and encourage users to leverage FIDO authentication. Secondly, we have a consumer website, loginwithfido.com. A lot of how we talk on, today and the next 2 days, I admit it's full of jargon, and that doesn't really cut it with consumers. So it's very important to have, plain spoken language to help consumers understand how this all works. So the loginwithfido.com website is targeted both at consumers, but also as a resource that a service provider can use both for internal education, but also as an added resource for consumers who want to learn more about what this technology is that they're using to log in instead of passwords. So that's where we stand today. We have specs on market. We have programs in place to help drive adoption. We have a robust certification program. We continue to innovate. But let's talk a little bit about what's next as we head into 2022. We recently announced a very exciting program called the FIDO Certified Professional Program. This was an initiative inspired by some of our vendors who reported that there's an expertise gap in the market for professionals with skills needed to deploy FIDO in various settings. This program will help address that gap while also giving professionals the ability to develop, demonstrate, and showcase their FIDO knowledge and their FIDO implementation skills. We'll be sharing more details on this program later this month in a webinar, but also we'll be launching it in earnest in Q1 of 2022. So for those of you who are in the business of deploying FIDO, please tune in to learn more and take part in this program once it launches publicly next year. Additionally, we continue to work to fill the gaps around passwordless and identity, right? So authentication, we've released very robust authentication specs that prevent attack, but there are adjacent areas that still need to be addressed. And we've been working on these for a couple of years now and making great progress. The first space is identity verification and binding. Frankly, this might be the most important work that FIDO is doing, right? It helps address the growing need for remote identity verification and also stands to close the social engineering backdoor that so many hackers can leverage during the recovery process. Simply put, what we're aiming to do here is match our commitment to possession-based authentication with an approach to identity verification and account onboarding that also leverages possession-based factors. That again closes the opportunity for hackers to leverage social engineering tricks to take advantage of knowledge-based forms of identity verification and account recovery. Secondly, IoT, right? That's another adjacent space where the explosion of devices being deployed are numbers so staggering that it's hard to get your head around. The main problem with all this growth is that the explosion of devices has historically outpaced the required security mechanisms, many of which default to knowledge-based credentials. So again, what we're trying to do here is to take the password out of IoT, starting from the point of device manufacturing and device onboarding. So both these initiatives continue to progress, and we're making solid headway with working groups on both fronts. So to summarize, FIDO is very much the future of user and device authentication. We feel very good about the progress we've made. We look forward to sharing updates with you all over the next 3 days, giving you insights on not just where the technology is coming from and where it's going, but also on how different organizations are deploying it successfully and at scale throughout Asia Pacific. We encourage you to tune in over the next 3 days, be engaged with FIDO Alliance as a member of our community or as a member of FIDO Alliance. You can follow us online on social media. and through all the typical channels where FIDO has presence. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining today, and I look forward to a good 3 days ahead. Thank you.